Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. Today we are returning to Fallout 76, where we're going to spend another 1,000 scrip, but we have a special edition because this is the Bombs Drop event sale, so the 3-star ranged legendary weapons that we will be purchasing are only going to cost 50 scrip instead of 100, so we'll get 20 pulls today instead of 10. I decided to go on ahead and keep this all in one longer video, but in the future, if you prefer to see these longer videos broken up into shorter videos, please be sure to let me know in the comments. And as always, if you enjoy content like this, please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps the channel out, and it doesn't cost you anything. Alright, let's go on ahead and get started here. So for our first 3-star ranged legendary weapon today, we will get a Troubleshooters pipe bolt-action pistol with bashing damage increased by 50% and 25% less VATS AP cost. So this one is not terribly exciting. The plus 50% damage to robots is one of the Slayer's effects, and the Troubleshooters effect is one of the more useful of the Slayer's effects because you've always got the nuke silos where you're going to fight robots and events like Encrypted where you're going to fight robots, so plus the daily ops, so there's plenty of opportunities to get use out of a weapon like this. The bashing damage increased by 50%. Unfortunately, it doesn't do a whole lot, really, on any weapon other than the minigun. The minigun, if you put a shredder mod on it and use it as a melee weapon, the bashing damage increased by 50% legendary effect really helps that. But in pretty much every other case, it's effectively worthless, basically like not having a second legendary effect. The 3rd star, the 25% less VATS AP cost, that is a great legendary effect, and a weapon like this is very likely to be used in VATS just to make sure that you can hit your weak points and get your extra damage that way, plus being able to get some extra damage from VATS criticals will help a lot with a weapon like this as well. Unfortunately, the pipe bolt action pistol is not a terribly exciting weapon to begin with. It's essentially a pipe version of the hunting rifle. If you want a slow, heavy-hitting weapon and you're a pistol build, like a gunslinger build, then this might be a decent weapon for you, but overall, I don't see a lot of people running around with a pipe bolt-action pistol, and I don't imagine anybody really wants to, for the reasons that it's pretty slow, the damage is subpar to the hunting rifle, and it's just very, very slow. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a Gormans Bow with replenishing action points with each kill and faster movement speed while aiming. So this is an interesting roll, but not really particularly good. The Gormans effect is 24% extra damage if both of your hunger and thirst meters are 100% full. That totals up to 24% extra damage, which is not a whole lot. Not when you see things like junkies or aristocrats giving plus 50%. So, not to mention the fact that no matter how diligent you are with keeping your character fed and provided with water or whatever it is that they prefer to drink, then you're still going to have times where your hunger and thirst meters are going to drop below 100%, and the extra damage you're going to get from that is going to deplete as well. So, I really don't find that for the Gormans effect to be particularly interesting. The replenishing action points with each kill can be very useful for a VATS build because one of the reasons to use VATS is to get some extra damage from the criticals, and when you run out of AP, obviously you're not going to be able to use VATS for a while, and being able to get some extra AP when you kill things, that's going to keep you running in VATS and hitting those weak points and getting those extra critical damage longer, so that's a good thing. The faster movement speed while aiming, that's not really doing a whole lot for most players. If you're running the Speed Demon mutation, then it's effectively doing nothing at all. Once you've got the Speed Demon mutation, to the best of my knowledge, there is no other improvement to movement speed that will actually help with that. You've just got the fastest movement speed that you can get in every situation. There may be some exceptions that I'm not aware of, but as far as I know, that is the case. Even if you don't have that, most players are probably not moving around a whole lot while they're aiming. I know I typically don't. You typically, at least the way I play, is typically aim, kill something, and then move. So overall, this one's pretty much a dud. So let's move on to the next one. And here we have a Gormans Gauss Rifle with the plus 50% VATS hit chance, and hits have a chance to generate a stealth field. So we talked about the Gormans effect on the last weapon, and it's pretty much the same thing here. It's not the worst effect in the world by any means, but it's just not especially exciting. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, however, is actually one of my favorite weapons on, or I'm sorry, favorite legendary effects for any weapon that you're going to be using in VATS. And the Gauss Rifle is a weapon that you could definitely use in VATS effectively to get some extra damage from targeting those weak points as well as the criticals. And on a weapon that hits as hard as the Gauss Rifle to begin with, you can get a lot of one-shot kills with that. So the plus 50% VATS hit chance really helps with that on a weapon like this. The hits having a chance to generate a stealth field, that could be useful if you are a full health player and are having trouble keeping your character in stealth. I do believe you'd be better off just running a full set of chameleon armor, because that would take care of that much more effectively than this. Basically, you would just have to stop moving for a moment, your stealth field would kick in, and you typically will lose the enemies that way. But if you're having problems and you don't want to, or you're still working on getting your good set of chameleon armor, then that effect could be useful for you, at least in the interim. So overall, not a terribly exciting weapon, but not the worst. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have a Mutant Slayer's missile launcher with plus 50% damage to super mutants, a plus 50% VATS hit chance, and 90% reduced weight. So the Mutant Slayers is another one of the Slayer's effects. It's plus 50% damage to the appropriate creature type. And the Mutant Slayers is probably, potentially even the most useful of the Slayer's effects, because there's daily ops with super mutants in them, and for most players, when you're looking to grind out some experience, you're probably going to be going and hunting some super mutants over at Westex. So there's a very high likelihood that you're going to be killing super mutants on the regular, so you can definitely find predictable situations to use a Mutant Slayer's weapon. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, I talked about that earlier. That's a great effect. It has the drawback on launcher weapons, like the missile launcher, for example, that if you miss your VATS hit shot, or VATS shot, then your projectile just kind of goes off into nothingness, so you don't get the explosion, whereas if you're shooting it outside of VATS, then even if you miss, you're still likely to get at least a little bit of splash damage on the creature. But with the plus 50% VATS hit chance, that means you're going to hit that many more of your VATS shots, so that could actually be very useful on a weapon like this. The 90% reduced weight, that's really great for a missile launcher. Not only because they're heavy to begin with, but because they don't have a whole lot of mods, so if you keep in mind that the mods that you add to a weapon are not benefiting from the 90% reduced weight, a lot of weapons such as rifles, pistols, and things like that get fairly heavy even after you've modded them out, even if they do have the 90% reduced weight on them. A launcher, because it's only got a missile launcher, because it's only got a couple of mod slots available for it, is not going to gain so much weight. Additionally, this is probably not the type of weapon that you're going to use as your main weapon. So when you're running around, it's probably something that you're going to use when you end up with some missiles in your inventory and you'd rather shoot something with them as opposed to just dropping them. So 90% reduced weight really makes that a viable option. It would be much nicer if the first star was more effective, but overall it's not a terrible roll. So let's move on to the next one. And here we have a Juggernaut Short Flamer with plus 50% VATS hit chance and plus 1 agility. So the Juggernaut's effect, again, not one of my favorites. It's only 25% increased damage at 100% health. That's not terrible, don't get me wrong, but it just feels like it should be much higher than that, because, frankly, it's harder than you might think to stay at 100% full health all the time. It may not be that difficult for a stealth commando, perhaps, but for most other builds, you're going to have some difficulty. Even just picking up a few rads knocks you off that 100% health effect there. So overall, I'm not a fan of the Juggernaut's effect, but it doesn't cost you a whole lot. You know, you don't have to run at low health, you don't have to have addictions, you don't have to keep 29,000 caps on you, and anything like that. So it's not the worst thing like that, you just have to keep yourself healed up. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, while it is one of my favorite effects, this is really not the right weapon for that effect. A weapon like this is going to burn through your AP very, very quickly. So you're not going to get a whole lot of effect out of trying to use it in VATS, or a lot of benefit. You may be able to use it and, find your target and then just burn through your AP and then kill them outside of VATS pretty quickly. But I don't see a lot of players trying to use the Flamer in VATS regularly. So that's kind of a lost effect on a weapon like this. The +1 agility, it's not bad. I don't think anyone's ever going to complain about getting an extra point of agility there. It increases your AP for VATS or sprinting, and it makes you stealthier if you're a stealth build. But overall, it's pretty unexciting on a weapon like this. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have an AntiArmor Ultrasite Gatling Laser with 25% faster fire rate, and your VATS critical meter fills 15% faster. So this is a pretty solid weapon right here. The Ultrasite Gatling Laser is not necessarily one of the best of the heavy guns at the end of the game, but it is a solid choice. It's also got the benefit of it uses fusion cores for its power source, so chances are if you're using a heavy weapon, you're running around in power armor most of the time so that you can benefit from stabilized, and the anti-armor effect is going to benefit with that, although you will see diminishing returns. Your anti-armor effects combined with stabilized do not add up exactly 50-50, 50% plus. I can't remember what stabilized is. I think it's 70-some%. But anyway, they don't just add up. You would get 50% of your armor penetration from the anti-armor, and then the other remaining 50% you would get the armor penetration for stabilized from that amount. So overall, it's still useful, but the faster fire rate is very good on a weapon like this, especially because it's using the fusion cores, and there is a perk under intelligence, I believe it's called Power User, that if you're running the full ranks of it, allows you to double the length of time that fusion cores last. That gives you, I believe, 500 rounds with a fusion core in a weapon like this. So it can definitely keep firing for quite some time. The third effect, your VATS critical meter filling 15% faster, is kind of lost on a weapon like this just because this weapon is not really the type you're going to be able to use in VATS very effectively. It fires so quickly that even if its VATS AP cost is not particularly high, it's just going to burn through your AP pool very, very quickly. So most people are not going to be using it in VATS. But overall, this is a solid roll, and I will probably put this one up on my vendor because I suspect there will be somebody interested in this one. So let's move on to the next one. Here we have a Furious Hellstorm missile launcher with 25% faster fire rate and 15% faster reload. So the Hellstorm missile launcher is an interesting weapon. If you are going to actually try to run around and main weapon a missile launcher, the Hellstorm is probably a better choice than the standard missile launcher. I don't imagine too many players are trying to do that, but it is always an option, I suppose. The Furious effect is a solid effect, but it's much, much better on a faster firing weapon, especially an automatic weapon, because the way it works is the first shot does 0% extra damage, then the second shot 5% extra damage, then the third shot 10%, and so on, each shot adding 5% until you get to either 45 or 50% extra damage. So on a slow firing weapon like a missile launcher, you're oftentimes not going to see any effect from it whatsoever, because you're going to kill things in one missile. And if you don't, you might see an extra 5%. That's really not exciting. The 25% faster fire rate on a weapon like this is again not particularly exciting. It's largely a lost effect on anything that's not a fully automatic weapon. On fully automatic weapons, it really is one of the best, and in some cases the very best, second star available. But for slower weapons, it's just not doing a whole lot because typically they're already firing as quickly as you can pull the trigger. So it's not doing a whole lot for you. The 15% faster reload, that's great on pretty much any weapon, and on a weapon like this that you're going to have to reload relatively regularly, that's even better. Honestly, though, I would prefer to see the 90% reduced weight on it, like on the missile launcher we had earlier, just because it would make this weapon a lot more viable for carrying around just to launch off those missiles that end up in your inventory rather than dropping them. So, overall, not an exciting roll. Let's move on to the next one. Here we have a Medic's Short Ultrasite Laser Pistol with 25% damage while aiming, and hits have a chance to generate a stealth field. So I'll start with the Ultrasite Laser Pistol. Unlike the Ultrasite Gatling Laser, the Ultrasite Laser Pistol does less damage than the basic laser pistol, whereas with the Ultrasite Gatling Laser versus the Gatling Laser, it's reversed. So that means that it's already kind of unexciting because of that. And the laser weapons in this game overall are not particularly exciting. The Ultrasite Gatling Laser is a bit of an exception just because of how quickly it can fire and the fact that it can use fusion cores for its ammo, making it potentially ammo efficient and relatively powerful in the right situation at least. This is not. The 25% damage bonus while aiming, that's a good thing, but chances are if you're going to be trying to use an ultrasite laser pistol or mod it out to use it as an ultrasite laser rifle, you're probably going to want to use VATS to try to get some extra damage out of your criticals, which means that your 25% damage bonus while aiming is not going to help you out much there, because it doesn't help in VATS. His having a chance to generate a stealth field, we talked about that before. Again, I think that if you really want some help trying to stay in stealth, a full set of chameleon armor is the best way to go, but it could still be useful for you, especially if you are already running a full set of chameleon armor and having trouble staying in stealth, or, you just don't want to be running chameleon armor for whatever reason. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. This one is not exciting. And here, we got an Exterminator's Gatling Laser with replenishing action points on each kill and +1 perception. So, the plus 50% damage to Mirelurks and Bugs, the Exterminator's effect, is probably one of the least useful of the Slayer's effects, because how often are you really going around and hunting Mirelurks or bugs of some sort? You may be trying to kill a Mirelurk Queen every day if you're still trying to grind out rep with Crater and you're turning in Mirelurk Queen meat to the raiders over at Ohio River Adventures every day, but that's really about the only real use case I can see for a weapon like this, and most players are not going to keep a weapon that's this heavy around just for that sort of a use. I know I certainly wouldn't. The second effect, replenishing action points with each kill, that's, as I talked about earlier, a potentially useful ability, but it's kind of lost on this for the same reason that the 15% VATS critical meter fill speed was lost on the AntiArmor Ultrasite Gatling Laser we saw earlier. Most players are not going to be using this weapon in VATS, and even if you are, you're going to burn through your AP so quickly that that's really just not going to keep you going. The +1 perception, that is a nice effect, but it's kind of lost on a weapon like this. Its main benefit is more VATS accuracy, so it's just not really doing a whole lot for you here. And this is the Gatling Laser as opposed to the Ultrasite Gatling Laser, so it's also an inferior weapon to the Ultrasite Gatling Laser. So overall, I think this one's probably going to be fed back into the legendary Scrip machine. Alright, let's see what we get next. Now we've got a Berserker's Black Powder Rifle with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, and your VATS critical meter filling 15% faster. So, the Berserker's effect, it got a buff recently. Well, it lost most of its debuff, maybe all of its debuff recently, to where it used to be that Berserkers, if you were wearing any sort of armor, it would actually do less damage than a non-legendary version of the weapon. They removed that effect, so that's a good thing, but staying alive with no armor is much more difficult than trying to stay alive at low health in this game. So there's Also, not nearly as much in the way of synergies with it. You know, at low health, you have Serendipity, you have Nerd Rage, you have Adrenal Reaction Mutation, several other things that synergize very well with helping you stay alive and do extra damage when you're at low health. When you're running at full health with no armor, the only thing you've really got going for you is Berserkers. So, it's not the most exciting legendary effect in the game for that reason. And if you are going to try to use it, I really think most players would try to use it on a stealthy weapon. The Black Powder Rifle, unfortunately, is not a stealthy weapon. There's no way to put a suppressor on it. You can use it from quite a range, but you're going to be discovered pretty quickly. So you're going to find yourself in trouble. Also, because the Black Powder Rifle fires so slowly, you're not even going to be able to count on the weapon to get yourself out of trouble. So this weapon, just because of that, I think is already a poor option, but the VATS critical hit's doing plus 50% damage. If you did choose to use a weapon like this in VATS, which would be very possible, you can get some extra damage by targeting weak points as well as from the VATS critical hits. Having the VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, that could be very useful on a weapon like this to try to make sure that you are getting one-shot kills as often as possible, because that's about the only way a weapon like this is going to be at all worthwhile. The VATS critical meter filling 15% faster, well, just like the critical hits doing plus 50% damage, it's going to help you out by making sure that you can get more of those criticals, which means that you are going to get more of those one-shot kills with a weapon like this. But even so, with such a bad first star for a weapon like this, I don't think anyone's even going to be running around like this just for fun. I think this one is going back to the Scrip machine. So let's go ahead and see what we get next. And here we've got a Juggernaut single action revolver with plus 25% damage while aiming and breaks 50% slower. So I talked about the Juggernaut's effect earlier. It's going to be even harder to stay alive or keep yourself at full health when your weapon is not suppressed, so that is not the ideal weapon for the Juggernaut's effect, and really I'm not a fan of it, so I'm not going to beat that to death. The plus 25% damage while aiming, it's a great effect on the right weapons. Really heavy weapons are probably the ones that benefit most from it. A weapon like this, you are really going to want to use in VATS to try to get some extra damage from those VATS critical shots, and that means you're not going to get any benefit from that 25% damage while aiming. The breaking 50% slower, that's great on pretty much anything, because who likes repairing their gear? They could have actually just foregone that altogether with Fallout 76, and I don't think anybody would have complained about that. So overall, though, this one is pretty unexciting. So let's move on to the next one. And here we get a Zealots Hellstorm missile launcher with plus 25% damage while aiming and 15% faster reload. So the Zealots is another one of the Slayer's effects, and overall I don't consider it that useful because it works on Scorched and Scorched Beast basically. Now obviously there are a lot of other things that can end up becoming Scorched, basically anything that the Scorched Beast can turn Scorched, but you don't see those all the time except for maybe at Scorched Beast Queen fights. So overall, most of the time when you're thinking Scorched, you're thinking the human Scorched, and those guys are pretty squishy as it is. So plus 50% damage from a missile launcher to them is not doing a whole lot, because chances are if you hit them with this thing, they're probably already dead anyway. The 25% damage bonus while aiming, that can be helpful, especially against something like the Scorched Beast Queen or Scorched Beasts, but this is probably not the weapon you want to be fighting those things with, because they are very resistant to explosive damage, and a good chunk of this weapon's damage is explosive damage. So that's not necessarily doing a whole lot, and the 25% damage while aiming against Scorched, sure, it's nice, but again, if you're hitting a Scorched human, then chances are they're going to be dead even if this thing was not legendary. So not doing a whole lot there either. The 15% faster reload, well, as I've said before, that's great on any weapon, and on weapons with low capacity such as this, it's going to be even more useful. But the other two effects on this weapon are not very good, so I'm going to call this one a loser. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have a Nocturnal short radium rifle with the last round in a magazine has 25% chance to deal double damage and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So the Nocturnal effect got a buff recently when all the other legendary effects got reworked. And like the Berserker's effect, before it used to be that if you were using it during the day, it was worse than a non-legendary version of the same weapon. They removed that debuff, which helps. But it still has the drawback of not seeing its full benefit except for a very short period of time at night. Now, it is a very strong effect during that short period, but unless you're the sort of player who is going to remember to switch weapons just by in-game time of day, it's probably not going to do a whole lot for you. I know I'm not that type of player. The second effect, the last round in a magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage, is basically worthless in my opinion. The 25% chance to deal that double damage is way, way too low. And beyond that, I think a lot of players, myself included, regularly reload their weapons when they have a moment of break in the fighting, so in many cases you're not even firing that last round in the magazine, so that 25% chance drops to 0%. So overall, it's almost like not having a second legendary effect at all. The third effect, plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, it's not a terrible effect. On a weapon like this, I think a lot of players would likely use VATS to get some extra VAT damage from the VATS critical shots, but it's not a requirement by any means, and if you're aiming the weapon, getting some extra damage resistance while doing that is not a bad thing. If you have armor that is in the neighborhood of 350 to 400 or more damage resistance, however, then you're going to see diminishing returns on how much protection that 50 damage resistance is really going to give you. So overall, not one of my favorite third stars, but it's not terrible. But this weapon overall is not great. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. Alright, and here we have an AntiArmor 50 cal machine gun with replenishing action points with each kill and 90% reduced weight. So, I talked about the AntiArmor effect a bit earlier. It is one of the best effects in the game. Its major drawback is that it doesn't really do a whole lot against enemies that don't have very much in the way of armor, but those enemies tend to be pretty squishy already, so I don't consider that to be too much of a drawback. Unfortunately, most weapon types do have a perk or a mod or something that will provide the weapon with some amount of armor penetration, so depending on how you are built with your perks and how you mod the weapon out, depending on what the weapon is as well, this effect can have varying usefulness. On shotguns that have no perks and only combat shotguns have a mod to reduce armor or to provide armor penetration, then it's great. Against other weapons or on other weapons, it really varies, but it's still one of my favorite effects, and it's even competes with Bloodied when you're running low health for the amount of damage it can do in many situations. So overall, a very good first star. The second effect is solid, but this is probably not the weapon that you want it on. Most heavy guns, you're typically going to be either hip firing or aiming down sights, and neither of those require action points. I mean, sure, getting some more action points with each kill will allow you to sprint some more, and that's great for everyone, but overall, I don't know that this effect is going to do a whole lot for you on this weapon. The 90% reduced weight is great for every heavy weapon just because, well, they're heavy. But also, heavy weapons typically have a much smaller number of mods, and as I mentioned, the mods are not benefiting from the 90% reduced weight, so overall, it makes that effect much more useful for heavy guns. So overall, this one's not amazing, but fairly solid. So let's go on ahead and see what else we get. And here we got an Exterminator's Pipe Revolver with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and breaking 50% slower. So we talked about the Exterminator's effect before, really still one of the least exciting of the Slayer's effects. And the VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage, however, on a weapon like this could be very, very good. The pipe revolver is the only revolver in the game that you can put a suppressor on, so it does have some utility in that regard if you want to get some extra damage from sneaking around and getting those stealth hits for it. And then the VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage on top of that, because if you're using a revolver, chances are you're going to be using VATS to try to get some extra damage from those VATS critical hits. That also helps. That effect right there, all by itself on this weapon, makes this weapon somewhat interesting. The first effect keeps it from being especially good, unfortunately, but the third effect is not bad. As I said, breaking 50% slower, it's a good effect on pretty much anything, because keeping your weapon running longer is going to keep you in the fight longer, so that's always a good thing. It's never good when your weapon breaks in the middle of a fight. So let's go on ahead and see what else we get here. And here we've got an instigating Gatling Plasma with plus 25% damage while aiming, and your VATS critical meter filling 15% faster. So the instigating effect, it got nerfed a while back. It is a lie. It is not doing double damage that you see on your card, assuming that you have equipped any perks or added or used any other effect to try to gain some extra damage out of the weapon. So what it does do is it doubles the base damage of the weapon. On slower, heavy-hitting weapons, that can still be very useful, as it will greatly increase their chances of getting those one-hit kills that those slower, heavy-hitting weapons really want to get. On a faster-firing weapon like the Gatling Plasma, it's much less exciting. It is, possible that sometimes you can get that effect to last through the first few shots of a faster firing weapon, but that's a glitch, not something that I really endorse trying to take advantage of. It will probably happen sometimes when you're using a faster firing weapon like this, but it's not something that I would recommend really banking on. The second effect, 25% damage bonus while aiming, that's great for a weapon like this, because most players are not going to be using a weapon like this in VATS. It's just going to chew through your AP very, very quickly, so most players are going to opt to either hipfire it or aim it down sights. And if you aim it down sights, you get plus 25% damage just for doing so. That's not a bad deal, especially on a weapon like this. The VATS critical meter filling 15% faster. Well, on a weapon like this, it's kind of a lost effect because, as I mentioned, most players are not going to be using a weapon like this in VATS very much, so you're not going to be trying to take advantage of those VATS critical hits. So, overall, this one's pretty mediocre. Not the worst you could roll, but not the best either. So let's see what else we get. And here we've got an Aristocrats 10mm pistol, with replenishing action points with each kill and faster movement speed while aiming. Now this one's pretty solid as far as pistols go. Pistols are a bit underpowered in this game, but they can still be useful. I mean, you can definitely build a pistol character. I've got a pistol character that does just fine in the vast majority of situations. The 10mm pistol is probably the premier gunslinger weapon in the game at the moment. Maybe they'll add some more later on, but there's really not a whole lot of... I'm sorry, not gunslinger. Guerrilla. There's not really a whole lot of guerrilla options in the game at the moment, and the 10mm pistol is probably the best of the bunch. The Aristocrats effect is actually very good for full health builds, and really it's not bad for any build. The only drawback to it is that you need to keep 29,000 or more caps on hand to gain the maximum benefit, which is plus 50% damage. And once you reach high level and have bought most of the plans and things like that that you're really interested in owning for the character, keeping 29,000 caps on your person is really not difficult at all. The replenishing action points with each kill, that's going to be great on a weapon like this, because you are going to have to put several shots on most enemies just because of its low damage for them to go down. That, even though its AP cost is very low as a pistol, it is still going to eat up your AP as you burn through the shots. So getting some of that AP back when you kill something, that's going to keep you killing longer. So that's a good thing. The faster movement speed while aiming, as I've mentioned before, if you're running the Speed Demon mutation, it's basically doing nothing at all for you. And even if you're not, I myself don't do a whole lot of aiming or movement while aiming, so it would do very little for me. I'm guessing most other players probably don't either, but maybe I'm wrong. If you're a player who runs around while aiming all the time, please feel free to let me know. Alright, let's move on to the next one. And here we got a Ghoul Slayer Short Flamer with plus 25% damage while aiming and 90% reduced weight. So this one is interesting. The Ghoul Slayer's effect is another one of the Slayer's effects. It is probably one of the less useful ones in my opinion, just because most ghouls, excluding the, big bloated glowing ones, are pretty squishy to begin with, and in most cases you can bring them down pretty quickly with a non-legendary weapon. But, getting some extra damage against them is never a bad thing. Extra damage never hurts. The plus 25% damage while aiming on a weapon like this, however, is very good. A weapon like this is going to burn through your AP bar very, very quickly, and so most players are not going to be using it in VATS, so having that plus 25% damage just for aiming down the sights, that's quite a bargain. And the 90% reduced weight, as I've mentioned before, on heavy guns is a very good thing, just because they don't have as many mods, so they're not going to lose a whole lot of benefit from that the way some other weapon types will. So overall, this weapon is something I could see a newer player who's focusing on heavy guns running around with for a while, at least until they get something with a better first star that's also got something like a 25% damage while aiming or faster fire rate or something on the second star. So anyway, let's move on to the next one. And here we've got a Mutant Slayer short 10mm submachine gun with plus 50% limb damage and 90% reduced weight. So the Mutant Slayer's effect we talked about earlier, it's one of the more useful Slayer's effects because you have Super Mutant Daily Ops, you have West Tech, and several other places where Super Mutants are known to show up that players are likely to farm, so it has that utility there. The plus 50% limb damage, overall I'm not a huge fan of that effect, although on a weapon like this that has a little bit lower damage and a nice fast fire rate, that could actually be very useful because it may allow you to cripple an enemy just by chance as you're trying to bring them down and prevent them from being able to hit you. So that's not a terrible thing. Overall, it's still not terribly exciting. I'd rather have either a 25% faster fire rate, 25% damage while aiming, even VATS crit chance, or VATS critical damage. All those would probably be better effects on a weapon like this. The 90% reduced weight, by the time you mod this out, it's largely going to be lost. This weapon's not particularly heavy to begin with, but once you put the mods on it, you're probably going to have something that's at least half the weight of a fully modded version that didn't have that effect anyway. So you're not going to get a whole lot of benefit out of this, but it's something. Overall, this one is not exciting. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. And here we got a Zealots the Fixer with bolts exploding for area damage and VATS critical meter filling 15% faster. So I talked about the Zealots effect earlier. It's probably one of the less useful ones overall, although on this weapon it might be a bit more useful because this is the kind of weapon that you could bring to a Scorchbeast Queen fight or even just go hunting Scorchbeasts with and have a pretty good time. So it's a bit more useful on a weapon like this. This weapon is definitely going to hit the human Scorched enemies hard enough that it's not going to benefit all that much from the extra 50% damage to Scorched because they'd go down pretty quickly against this weapon anyway. Bolts exploding for area damage, that's always a good thing. It just increases your damage. It also does give you some area of effect damage, although the area of the explosion is not very large, so in many cases you're not really going to splash that damage onto other enemies, but it's still extra damage onto your main target, and that's never a bad thing. The VATS critical meter filling 15% faster. That's very good on a weapon like this, because a weapon like this is very likely to be used in VATS, and getting those critical meters even more frequently, or getting that critical meter filled more frequently to get those extra damage from critical shots, is going to increase your damage output noticeably. So overall, this one is not terribly exciting, but not terrible by any means. Fixers are almost always at least half decent. So let's go ahead. I kind of lost track of how many I've pulled, but I believe I need about 2 more. So we'll do 2 more here. And here we've got an Exterminator's Crusader pistol with plus 50% damage to Mirelurks and Bugs, with bashing damage increased by 50% and 50 damage resistance while aiming. So we talked about it before, the Exterminator's effect, unless you're hunting Mirelurk Queens for some crater rep, is probably not going to be doing a whole lot for you. The bashing damage increased by 50% is doing absolutely nothing for you on this weapon. The plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, well, depending on the armor you have, it may or may not be doing much for you. But overall, this weapon is pretty much a dud. So let's go ahead and try our last roll, see if we get something good here. And we did not. We got a Mutant's Snub-Nose 44 pistol with plus 50% limb damage and plus 50 damage resistance while aiming. So the Mutant's effect, it got buffed as well during the legendary effect rebalancing that happened a few months back, and it did get a buff. It went from just a straight 10% damage buff if you were mutated to 5% damage buff per mutation, up to a maximum of 5 mutations for a maximum of 25%. Now that's not a whole lot of damage, but at the same time, most players, in late game players anyway, are likely to be running 5 mutations anyway, so it doesn't cost you anything at all. And unlike the Gormans effect, as long as you keep your Starch Genes perk equipped, you are not going to have to worry about losing your mutations, so that 25% damage will stay consistent, which makes it much better than Gormans in my opinion. The plus 50% limb damage, that is, I talked about earlier, somewhat useful on faster hitting weapons that don't hit particularly hard. This weapon, being semi-automatic, is not the best weapon for it. You really just want to put your enemies down as quickly as you can with this weapon in as few shots as possible. The plus 50% limb damage is really not helping you do that, so it's really not helping this weapon. The plus 50 damage resistance while aiming, well, if you do a lot of aiming, then that could be useful. Chances are with a pistol weapon of any type, really, but with a weapon like this, you are going to be trying to use VATS and get that extra damage from the VATS critical shots, as well as from targeting weak points. So if you're doing that, then the 3rd star is doing absolutely nothing for you. So overall, this one I'm calling a loser as well. Alright, well, we did get a couple of interesting weapons. That AntiArmor Ultrasite Gatling Laser is particularly good, so I expect somebody will probably pick that up and want to use that. Anyway, if you enjoyed content like this, then keep an eye on my channel. There'll be more coming next week, and I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you.